All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Book Talk. I am Reverend Brittany Graves. I'm the Associate Coordinator for Public Witness and Advocacy at ABHMS, American Baptist Home Mission Societies. And today I am excited about a conversation I am having with Reverend Susan Smith. We are discussing her book, With Liberty and Justice for Some. But before we jump into the conversation, I want to give you all a heads up on her biography of all the great work that she is doing and has done. And so I begin. Reverend Susan Smith is a graduate of Occidental College and Yale Divinity School. She is a communications consultant with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference Incorporated, a consultant with People for the American Ways African American Ministers Leadership Council, and has served as one of the co-chairs of the Minority Vote Subcommittee of the Nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee. Reverend Susan Smith is also on a tri-chair of the Ohio Poor People's Campaign and a member of the board of directors for the League of Women Voters Ohio, and is the founder of Crazy Faith Ministries in Columbus, Ohio. She is the author of several books, including her latest, Rest for the Justice Seeking Soul, and the book we're here to discuss today, With Liberty and Justice for Some, the Bible, the Constitution, and Racism in America. And exciting news, this book is one of 3 finalists for the 2020 National Benjamin Franklin Awards in the Political and Current Events category. Congratulations to you on that.
Thank you so much.
So your book was released in the fall of 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, not only with COVID-19, but the pandemic of racism. And I cannot think of a more timely book release for people striving to respond and take action to unjust systems that are historical in nature or assumptive that brings liberty to all people. So I have a series of questions for you. And towards the end of our conversation, we are inviting people, whether you are here live in this moment, to comment and to engage. If you have something you'd like to ask Reverend Susan Smith, please submit it in the chat. I can't promise we'll get to all of them, but we will get to some. So please feel free to engage. And as we jump in, my very first question for you, what was your primary motivation for writing With Liberty and Justice for Some?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you and Judson Press for publishing the book, and for you guys hosting this book talk. I'm very appreciative of it, and I just need to thank you. The thing that got me going, that made me want to write this book, and I think sometimes when you are a writer, things bubble in your soul for a while. But one day, it's just out of the clear blue, I thought to myself, something is just really wrong, because been around all these people, all these white people who say they just love the Lord Jesus. They just love the Lord Jesus. And what I was seeing, what woke me up, it actually woke me up, was that how in the world can you be a Christian and lynch somebody on a Saturday night and get up and go to church the next morning and sometimes serve communion? I just couldn't. I mean, it did something to me. And I really began to chew it, because it made me angry, actually. Then it puzzled me, because in my mind, in this country, we have what I call 2 sacred texts, the Bible and the Constitution. Everybody talks about the Bible and everybody talks about the Constitution, but at the end of the day, very few people really pay really close attention to either unless and until they want to manipulate those texts for their own purposes. And so I grew up in a house where, you know, my first the first theologian in my memory is my mother, who,
Mm,
you know, taught, you know, that if you're going to be a Christian, you need to do what Jesus says to do. And she told us that all of the time, you know. So when we were watching when we would watch things that would go on, like in the civil rights movement, when um, like the police dogs and the fire hoses and all that, they were going after these people. And I was like, I was little, but I didn't understand how people could do that. And my mother, you know, unbeknownst to me, was watching from the kitchen, and she yelled out, "Yeah, you gotta forgive them too." And I'm thinking, well, what is that about? What it was about was that she had internalized, I say that she had ingested and digested the scriptures. And Jesus said, that was her thing. Jesus said, and Jesus said
mm,
that you have to love your enemy and you have to forgive those. If you don't forgive people, they won't forgive you. So that was my beginning. Yeah, that's where I really began to have my understanding of who Jesus is and what Jesus requires. So then as I read and studied history, because I'm not a historian, but I love to read history, and I'm reading about all these people who, you know, they're deeply religious, they say, but they're lynching people, and they're, you know, discriminating against people, and they're, you know, if the Supreme Court passes a law that they don't like, then they just ignore it. And I thought, okay, so that's really what got me going, because it's not right. It's still not right. It's not right. And I think that people, my goal was to get people to at least think about this stuff. I don't know how we fix it. I don't know if it can be fixed, but I know we need to think about the fact that it exists. We have a problem.
hmm Yes, I love that so much, how much you're bringing light to all the issues of this time, and blatantly, unashamedly stating them so that people can take a look at what is the truth of this moment and lean into it. I love that you mentioned your mother, and it reminds me of like just being connected to our lineage, being connected to history, and sometimes not knowing the fullness of history even within our own, but looking at how the how history is told over time in history books that we might read. But that leads me into the next question of what are some of the most telling truths and the history lessons that you uncovered while writing your book that you'd like to share or that were interesting to you?
Well, you know what? All of it is so interesting to me. You know, one of the very first things um, that I read that just made me had to start when you know, when you go through history, when you read stuff, because you know, when you're in empire, we live in the American empire, and so we are only told the things that the people in power want us to know. So we really want to understand what's going on. We really have to dig, and when you dig, you begin to see the rotten underbelly of America. Why we, you know, when they say you're playing the race card, when white folks say you're playing the race card, I'm saying, well, America was built on the race card. You know, we don't know that. We're not taught that. But so I was reading about how when the pilgrims came over, um, they believed that they had been sent by God, white people had been sent by God to this new world to form a country for white people.
Mm,
And it just like took the wind out of me. What are you talking about? They said and believed that their exodus, they likened their sojourn from Great Britain to this country to the exodus, you know, that Black people, you know, identify with, and that the Israelites had in the book of Exodus. And that was their sojourn, their traveling across the Atlantic was their exodus. And they believed that God sent them here to form a white country. So they did not see anything wrong than with exterminating or getting rid of or getting or performing genocide to get
mm,
rid of the Native Americans. They did not think that it was wrong. They really thought that they were doing God's will. So that really took, you know what, that took so much out of me that I thought this coming Thanksgiving, I'm not doing turkey ever again. I don't want to celebrate, you know, the genesis of the oppression of Black people. And there were Black people here when they came too, but they thought that they were doing the will of God. So it has done something to me. The other thing, one of the other things that really got to me was really the deep sense of religiosity that these bigots had. So this man named Sam Bowers, and he was a grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and
Mm.
he was involved in the murders of the three civil rights workers. And this is a man who was deeply religious. And you know what he believed? He believed, or he told the story, that he had had like a Damascus Road experience, that God had like struck him and given him the assignment to save white supremacy. He taught that. And so he remained religious, and he remained deeply committed to his call, and he would round up people to do his murders for him, killing off Black people and Jewish people and whomever else. And this is what got this is why, you know, all these things you did, they just make you stop and just say, tag. He would gather some of if they were going to go out on uh, a murder thing, you know, they're going to go lynch somebody, they would gather, they would fast, Brittany, and they would pray. They would fast and pray and ask God for God's guidance and God's help. And then they would go out and they would kill people. And I'm thinking, what is going on? And then there was another thing. I mean, there's so many things I could talk about this stuff all night, but there was one other thing that really got me. The march in Selma happened, and there was a very progressive Protestant minister in the South, in Alabama. He was known. His name was Reverend Marsh, and he was known for being a progressive. And he wrote this sermon called "The Sorrow of Selma." And when I was reading it, and I was reading about how he had written it, I thought, oh, this is good. At least there's somebody white who's a Christian who gets it, who understands the connection between this life and what God told us to do. But his theory, his thesis in that sermon was he was not quite sure that God had sanctioned the protesting of the Black people who were protesting for their right to vote. He was not sure. That was the sorrow of Selma. So, you know, when you begin to read, the more you read, the more you read, because it's just so heinous and it's so ugly, and it's so much a part of the American fabric. You just have to stop, and you're stunned. And I think that if all of us knew it, white people and Black people, if more of us knew this history, I think that our reactions and our interactions with the government and with each other would be a little bit different, because the fact that we go down the paths we go, and they have been made intentionally parallel, and not, you know, so and not so that they would intersect. We go on the myths and stuff that grandmom and them told us when we were a kid, and that's very, very limited. The people in power are the ones who write the history, and they have written the history in order to protect their power, their power. That's what it's been about. So, I mean, there is a lot of stuff that um, just make me just shake my head. It's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, that is a lot to take in. All the history that you've uncovered from just the amount of white people pray and manifest destiny to overpower and overcome people. And I really connected to what you're saying in regards to not celebrating Thanksgiving, because I think there's a lot of work we need to do to decolonize holidays, to decolonize the history that we're learning. And sometimes, like for instance, with Thanksgiving, if we're celebrating it without recognizing the back side of it and not knowing, then we sometimes continue to perpetuate those cycles. For, like you said, white folks or Black folks, it is good to know the history of this country, and your book lays the groundwork for it. It is a wealth of knowledge that is important for us to dive into. So I'm grateful for all the things that you have said, and the amount of work that you've done to uncover it. So I think it will be useful for years to come.
That's my hope. That's my hope.
Yes. As I lead into my next question, It is regarding that very topic of thinking about racism and the Christian context. And I'm wondering, oh, I can tell by your face already, what dialogue do you want people to have with liberty and justice for some? What do you want it to invoke today in thinking about racism and the Christian context?
Well, I think the first thing I want people to know is that that thing that I already mentioned, that when people say you're playing the race card, that should be shut down immediately, because America was built on racism. America, they people who get in a place where they want to do some preaching, they'll say that America is a Christian nation. It was founded as a Christian nation. It was not. The founders of the Constitution were very specific in saying that they did not want this to be a Christian nation. And they all went to church. But a lot of them were humanists or Quakers or different religions. They weren't Christian. They did not accept the mysticism and the metaphysical parts of Christianity. They didn't do any of that. What they were is very pragmatic. They were, because they had gone to church, as kids, they knew, bits and pieces of the gospel, but they were also, many of them, very wealthy. This country, if nothing else, is a country of capitalists. And what they were most interested in was protecting their wealth and increasing their power. And so they did not, they made a government that would protect them and their interests. And I think we need to know that. There's a guy that I quote in the book who said that by the time uh, 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 after Jesus' death, by the time the Roman Empire was at its height, Christianity had morphed so far away from what Jesus had taught. That's when it became the religion of empire. And the religion of empire is not the religion of Jesus the Christ. The religion of empire is what we're seeing in an exacerbated way. This Christian nationalism, which is not about Christian principles. It really is not, even though people say, they're Christian principles. It is not about Christian principles. It is about keeping money and power. That is all that it is. And God's name and Jesus' name are used to support and to sanction the activities that they do. And I think people need to understand that and not be, sometimes you can be intimidated by somebody who will say, this is a Christian nation. It is not a Christian nation. It was not founded as a Christian nation. And throughout history, Christianity has been used to just to promote power. So the Crusades, all of the violence of Christianity, that was not of Jesus or from Jesus. It was not. And so I think that when people begin to read, they really need to look into that and to understand that and to wrestle with that, so that we're not so surprised, or not so indignant when we hear things. One of the things somebody just sent me a message too, and she said she can't find where to hear the book talk, so I don't know, what to tell her. But somebody was saying that we were talking about pro-life, and so I said, because Christianity, as it has been practiced, has not been about life. It has not been about life. It has been about conquering others. The imperialism and the colonialism that you mentioned. It's been about that. So I wanted to tell people that this whole thing about the pro-life movement, just to kind of undergird the statement that I made, that this is that Christianity and Christian nationalism are two different things. Christian nationalism came into being really, like it was always there, but in this country it kind of took a different turn after the Brown v. Board of Education case. And white folks are really mad. I'm telling you, in history, when white folks have not liked, they don't care. They say this is a country of the rule of law, but when a law is passed that they don't like, they don't follow it, period. And so Brown v. Board of Education was passed, and it mandated that the schools had to be integrated, and white folks didn't want to do that. Well, one of the offshoots of that, one of the results of that, was that the federal government had been subsidizing segregated institutions, segregated colleges, segregated schools. But with Brown v. Board of Education, they were going to lose their funding, and so in order to keep their base, because they needed to find another, they were mad that their institutions were not going to be funded, and they got very angry about it. So they needed to find another way to keep people mobilized. People will mobilize around segregation and keeping the coloreds out. But once they couldn't do that anymore, once they couldn't uphold and support their segregated institutions and get tax breaks for it, they had to come up with another. They had to come up with another cause, and that's when they came up with this whole pro-life thing. Interestingly, at that point, and I think it was like in the 1960s, but up to that point, all of these people who said that they were, like, who now would say that they were pro-life, they did not care. They didn't care. They were pro-choice. But in order to keep the people engaged and to keep the contributions, the monetary contributions coming into the conservative political, socio-political, religious movement, they adopted this thing, pro-life, and people ate it up. I think people ought to know that. I think people ought to know that Christian nationalism is not your friend. It is not your friend. And it is not of Jesus. It really is not. There's just so many things where if you could just sit and read them, you think, and it would begin to make you understand some things. And in some ways, it can, when you understand more, you get less angry, you get more curious, and you get like an arsenal behind you in order to be able to fight the things, that they're trying to do to you, to your people, to the society. And it makes that song, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, have a whole new power source, because you become indignant. It's not just mere emotion because your feelings have been hurt, because your life has been, shattered because of the lack of adherence to the Bible or the Constitution. It becomes a knowledge base. And when we speak from knowledge, it is a whole different thing. And they don't want us to know the knowledge. And so that's why I think that one of the things that I want this book to do is to get people to read it and then say, shoot, I want to know more about that. I want to know more about that. And then as they get to know more about it, to tell their children about it. It says in the book of Deuteronomy, write it as frontlets between their eyes. Tell the children, tell the people, so that we are entitled to our emotions. We have been brutalized by this country in spite of the Bible and the Constitution. But when we come and we mix that righteous anger and indignation with a healthy dose of history, our battle plan becomes a little bit different.
Yes, indeed. I love all of that. You are preaching to me and preaching to everyone listening. That is a good word. And I think it brings us to a space where we're in movement from just accepting things as they are, but increasing this curiosity of why are things the way they are, and what can I do to change the things that are unjust, things that do not benefit me or benefit people of color, or just, yes, I appreciate that word. We are still live on Judson Press Facebook page. So for anybody who is here listening, we invite you to ask any questions that may arise from what you're hearing, or anything, any curiosities from the book itself. So please engage with us as we continue this conversation. The next question I have for you, Reverend Smith, is, in all the things, for instance, that you have uncovered through this book, and all the ways people are leading into curiosity, hopefully continuing to do so through this book, how would you encourage those striving for liberty and justice that have not always been on the receiving end of it?
I think one of the biggest tragedies of colonialism is how it keeps people's minds in shackles. It is easier. It is easier to remain shackled. It is work to get free. It's hard work. Um, One of the things that we want is, we want things to be easy. If we could just be free, but that's not the way life works. And when we think about, this is Holy Week, and when you think about the fact that Jesus the Christ died because he dared work for justice. That's what he did. He fought against the church folks and he fought against the government. He fought against them because he knew that their principles and their practices were not of God. They just were not of God. He spoke truth to power, and he got killed for it. Um, and he recognized that power, the people in power, had no regard for all of the people that God had made, and so he fought, and he fought until he died. And I just preached a sermon that said that once he died, he just didn't die. The resurrection, is a part of our legacy. But that resurrection, I think, has some levels. And he bodily got up, but spiritually, I think he got up. And I said in that sermon that he didn't know the names of the people who were coming, but there would be other people coming who would have that spirit of Jesus the Christ in them, that would understand that in order to be free, you must do the work. And there would be more, and there would be more, and they would suffer, and some of them would die. But for the people who understand this Christianity and Jesus' role on earth and his role after he died, is to understand how that spirit of resurrection continues. That spirit that he gave us, it's just as powerful as the spirit of our ancestors, like Fannie Lou Hamer and John Henry McNeil Turner and Vernon Damer and all these people who just, they fought until they could fight no more. Now, it's never going to be that everybody fights, but if we could get one more person, and they could get one more person to understand that this is a battle. Do we get angry? Moses said in the 5th book of Exodus, he said, God, I don't know why you called me to lead this people, because, I've been advocating on behalf of this people and you have not made life easier. It's just fascinating to read that, because even from our so-called patriarchs in the Bible, there is this air of frustration, and Moses was clearly frustrated. It's like Bill Jones wrote, "Is God a white racist? What the heck? Where are you? Why is this so difficult?" We don't know the answers as to why it's so difficult. And we don't know why God just won't fix it. If it is so wrong, which it is, why won't God fix it? I don't know. Don't you wish there was a good answer for that? But we do know this, that Jesus, while Jesus was on the earth, told us, showed us how it was we were supposed to fight this thing and continue to fight it. And if we do our part, what your grandmama say, you take one step, God will take two. That's the only reason we're still here. We have managed to push against the denigration of the Bible and push against the denigration of the Constitution. And we are still here in spite of all of the things that they have done, physically, spiritually, emotionally, economically. We are still here. We ain't going nowhere. But that's the spirit that we have to share, and that is the spirit of Jesus the Christ. And people want to just say, Jesus was, the way he's presented by the colonial impressionists, that he's just this white man, which he wasn't, and he's just like kneeling and on the rock, and the ray of sunshine is coming down. It's like no, Jesus was a radical. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. Jesus was from the wrong side of the tracks, and Jesus did not like injustice, and so he fought it. And so I think that if we could begin to teach people that and not be threatened by it. Sometimes you can feel threatened if you have a church or whatever, and the people just want to say hallelujah. Say hallelujah after you understand why you're saying hallelujah. You understand it gives you more power in the hallelujah. But I think that's what I would want. I would want people to understand that this walk is never going to be easy for those who are oppressed. And trust this, there are more oppressed people in the world than there are unoppressed. So if the oppressed people could get together and work together, we could do some things. We could do some stuff. If we could become that type of a beloved community, we could make some changes. But it just takes people understanding that there is risk involved. It's risk. And if you don't understand the component of risk in Christianity, I'm going to venture out and say you probably really don't understand the nature and the core of Christianity.
Yes, 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 indeed. I think you bring into question how we see Christianity in this day and age, and how sometimes the colonial aspects of Christianity do not fight for justice for those that are oppressed. But you also speak of this resilience within community, like that of Jesus, who was indignant and radical to fight for justice and bring others alongside him to do the same work. So, even in this day and age, when we're looking at the tumultuous circumstances and the injustice or unjust law, particularly for Black Americans, we still see themes of hope and resilience. And I think you, yes.
Yeah, let me share with you how much hope and resilience we have. You know, the colonial, the white folks, the missionaries who wanted, to save us because they thought we were savages. They weren't stupid. They knew that there was power in the Bible. The King James Version of the Bible had a lot of power in it. So the missionaries got together and they wrote what they call the Negro Bible. Can y'all see that? The Negro Bible. When I saw that, okay, so I kind of cussed out loud because I thought, what in the world? If this is a sacred text, how dare you? How dare you do that? But they did not want Black people. Then this was directly directed at Black people. So when people say you're playing the race card, tell them to sit down and to be quiet because it is all racial. It is all racial. So they did the Negro Bible. They did not want Black people to understand or believe that they had the right to be free. So in this Black Bible, in the Genesis, in the book of, I can't give you the whole thing because you'd be cussing too, but the book of Genesis, in the Standard Bible, there's 50 chapters. In the Slave Bible, there's only 14. In the book of Exodus, in the King James Bible or the Standard Bible, there's 40 chapters. And the Slave Bible, there's only 2. The book of Leviticus does not exist in the Slave Bible. The book of Numbers does not exist in the Slave Bible. The book of Deuteronomy has 34 chapters in the Standard Bible, has 8 chapters in the slave Bible. Joshua, Judges, and Ruth do not appear in the Slave Bible. Second Samuel does not appear in the Slave Bible. Second Kings has 25 chapters in the Standard Bible, 2 in the Slave Bible. The Gospel of Mark is totally not included. Romans has 16 chapters in the Standard Bible, 2 chapters in the Slave Bible. No Psalms, absolutely no Psalms in the Slave Bible. This is what they used to teach us. This is what they used to teach us, our forebears. So our forebears had enough, I think, of the Spirit of Jesus to say, something ain't right. Because even though we were prohibited from learning to read and stuff, our people are smart. They're smart. And they figured out a way. They would listen, they would listen to what the people said in church. And I would suppose they would go back to the camera and say, what they said, that ain't it. And they figured it out. And so in spite of the slave masters and the colonialists and the imperialists doing everything they could, including using the slave Bible, the Bible, making a slave Bible to keep us under their thumb, our people pushed back, got up, and went on. So I think we need to know stuff like that, and we need to share stuff like that so that we can understand how mighty we are. God may not have taken white supremacy away, which we all wish that God would do that, I think. But what we have to celebrate is that that's why they're acting stupid now with the voter suppression laws and stuff that they're trying to put in place, because they can see that people of color are not going to be turned around. We have come too far. We've been knocked down before, but we've gotten up. And why? Because we have internalized this God, the God that Jesus talked about, not the God of the white nationalists.
Oh, yes. Yes, to all of that. Fired up over the audacity.
Yes, and that's something, that is just something that they would feel like they had the right. Who's God? I mean, what? How in the world do you even fix your mind to bother with something that, I grew up thinking it was a sacred text. I still think it's a sacred text. There's a lot of issues, don't get me wrong, but there's a sacred text that, you do some exegesis and you can pull some stuff and you can figure out what was going on. But to take things out of the Bible so that you can keep a people oppressed, I think some people are going to go to hell if they haven't already. Just saying.
Yeah. That is definitely heavy news for sure. I know that whenever I saw that in your book, I was very much so shocked and surprised. Because I think a lot of the time I've heard stories of things being taken out of the Bible as far as like when it's read or when slaves were taught the Bible, but I did not know that there was a whole separate Bible that completely um, just took out entire texts that
Yeah, and I
clearly they would have known.
yeah, and I had a brief conversation with Ched Myers, who wrote Binding the Strong Man. He's a New Testament scholar, and he wrote a book called Binding the Strong Man. And I asked him, why would those people take the whole book of Mark out? Because Ched Myers concentrates on the book of Mark, and he said that they realized the power that was in the book of Mark. Mark was the very first gospel written, and all of the other gospel writers came after him. But his is a Mark really paints the picture. Now that I'm reading it, because I guess I didn't think that people way back in the 17th, 18th centuries had that much sophistication. How snobby of me to be able to think about. But they were racist from the beginning. They already knew what they wanted to do with our people. And they read the Gospel of Mark, and they, in essence, said, oh, hell no. And they took it out. How do you take a gospel out of the gospel? How do you take not only a gospel out of the New Testament, but the very first gospel written? Oh, no.
Wow. Yes, this conversation reminds me of a quote that I saw just earlier today that I'm gonna share with you. It says, "The education we receive can either liberate or enslave us."
Yeah.
And it just reminds me that how important it is to know history and to continue to uncover more and more and more of it. And I think you've done a great work in using your own indignation to actually uproot some of the very systems that we've seen so that we can continue to take a deeper dive into them more and more. So I think it is an encouragement to continue to do that work. And I'm thankful for all that you have done so far. And I hope it leads into to much more for people who are reading as well. I do have one question from someone who is tuning in that I'd like to ask and share with you. It says in the book, The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby, he states, racism never goes away, it adapts. Can you comment on this?
I think Jamar is exactly right. It doesn't go away. It has been with us from the beginning of time, and in people who are oppressed. Well, let me do this. Um, the whole Bible was written under 6 different periods of oppression. It is a book about oppressed people getting free. Okay, God getting them free. So 6 periods of oppression, beginning with Egyptian, then Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, Greek, and Roman. And in each of those periods of oppression, the Israelites, and then later on people who followed Jesus, but the Israelites had to find a way to fit in. They had to
Hmm.
find a way to fit in. If you don't assimilate, it's kind of like if you don't assimilate, some assimilate more than others, you end up getting swallowed by them, because that is just not it's not acceptable, and you cannot survive. And so because people need to survive, even though and we're human beings, the mindset of the Christian nationalist or of the white supremacist mindset is that other people who are not white, and primarily male but not white, are not human. But we know we're human, and human beings do what they need to do in order to survive. And so in each period and place and country of oppression, people have learned to assimilate, and so we adapt to what we must adapt to. The prayer and the hope is that there are enough people who will adapt only as much as they need to in order to survive, but to continue to push out of that in order to bring truth to the oppressed people. But you can't, all of us, all of us, we learned, away in the manger, no crib for his bed, all of the stories and the mores and all that kind of stuff that we got, they were all given to us by the oppressor. We have taken what we have needed, we have adapted what we have needed to adapt to, and we have moved on. Those who will fight for, truth and justice. So I think Jamar Tisby is exactly right.
Yes, indeed. Thank
And
you.
it's something that Jeremiah Wright said, and I'm not sure if he said it first or if Ched Myers said it first, but there are three things. He said theology is how we see God. And our theology informs our anthropology, which is how we see people. And our anthropology informs how we see our communities, our sociology. So our theology informs our anthropology, which then informs our sociology. So if we are in a place where many people, most people, black and white, I would venture to say, think God is a white man. They say that. I remember Megyn Kelly said, everybody knows God is white. I said, oh, that's the mindset. But if people are walking around and you can see it, Reverend Brittany, when you can see it, how people act and react with each other, they believe that God is a white man in power. What's that song about? Onward, Christian soldiers. It's about power and it's about strength, that kind of power. God is about power, but not about military power. But people see God, many people see God as like a military leader. That comes from Constantine and has been coming down, since that time. So their theology informs how they see each other, which informs their sociology, which is why we got all these white nationalists ready to, taking AR-47s and whatever numbers those guns are to the Capitol and thinking they can get away with it. And guess what? Pretty much they can, because that's how they see God. Many of them think that they're doing the will of God. Remember the image where they were in the Senate chambers and they stopped. Remember, they stopped before they continued to ransack the Senate chambers and they prayed. They lifted up holy hands. Their theology informs their anthropology, which informs their sociology.
Yes. Yes. That is almost makes me speechless to think about how things long ago with Manifest Destiny and how that came to America is very still much a part of the theology of many in this time right now. So I think it is so important to continue to combat that and recognize the connection to white supremacy, which, like you said, is not of God, is not the way Christianity has meant its purpose to be. Oh my goodness! Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there any last thoughts that you would share or want the people to know based off of your book, With Liberty and Justice for Some? And if you have, do you have the copy with you? Yes, that you can share with all who are watching.
Yes,
Award winning.
That just makes me grin. I'm so happy about that. But I want people, there are so many really good books out. And so I put a disclaimer at the beginning of the book, said I'm not a historian, because I don't want people thinking I'm trying to be something I'm not. I'm just a reader of history, and I love it. And I wrestle, because I preach, and so I wrestle with trying to stitch together some of the contradictions that we wrestle with. And a lot of times in our churches and in our lives, we just don't want to think about it. It's too painful. But if we don't think about it and we don't face it, what did Baldwin say? It is a fact that everything cannot be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it is acknowledged or seen. I'm paraphrasing it. We have to admit that there is a problem. All these people saying, well, there's no more racism. What island are you on? It's just like, my dog is getting ready to bark. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
But we have people in our history who have said things like, this is out of the book: slavery is not a sin. It's not a moral evil. For God, listen to this, for God never did and never will authorize men to commit sin. They just use God to wash over everything that they're doing. Slavery was not a sin. It's not immoral. It's well, you have to read some of this stuff and understand that just like we had lessons at our grandmama's table after church, they had lessons at their grandmama's house.
Yeah.
And they brought those lessons with them, and they carry those lessons with them. And so I think it is incumbent upon us to know as much as we can know and share it in ways we can share it. And you know what, Dr. Brittany, I don't ever argue racism with people. I don't do it. I don't argue religion. I like to tell the stories. I like the people to tell the stories and let the stories intrigue people and make people curious enough to want to know more about it. When I told a group of people in a very conservative church in West Virginia, and I looked, and it was an all-white congregation. It was very conservative. It was very wealthy, and they wanted me to talk about racism. And I thought, okay, well, God has jokes, because this right here is like, this is not even, I'm not even feeling it. But I looked at in that congregation, and so many white folks are so immediately defensive. They're just defensive. I'm not a racist. I didn't do, So I looked at the congregation. I just paused, and I began the session by saying, or the sermon by saying, I want to clear something up right away. I know none of you own slaves. And you could feel like the people like looking at each other like, what's she doing? I said, I just want you to know, we all know that we don't have to even worry about that. I am not saying that you own slaves. So let's start there. Let's start on that level playing field. And before I got into my sermon, I said, I just want to share with you a story. And I shared with them the story of little Ruby Bridges, because they dehumanize us. They don't think we feel. When Black people are shot by police, the white people don't think we feel. We carry those babies just like the white mamas carried the babies. We feel, we ache, we mourn, we grieve, and our grief is even worse because we can't get justice. And so as I looked at these people, I thought, I got to get y'all to understand that we are human beings. And so I told the story about Ruby Bridges, that little girl, and I really hammed it up. She was a little girl. She was a little girl. She was going to school on her very first day, and she had her little dress on. You remember when you were little, your mom used to, get those little dresses and starch them, and, get those little anklets and your little Mary Jane shoes and ribbons on your hair and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't care what color you were, your mamas did that in this country. That's part of our American, legacy. And so I told the story. And I wanted them to go back into that place and remember their own experiences and remember how precious a time that was. And then I told them about how little Ruby, how she was taken to school on that day and was accompanied by soldiers, and she didn't really understand what was going on, but they told her, don't look back, whatever you do. And so she went with her little lunchbox and her book bag, and the people were screaming at her, and she thought it was Mardi Gras. She thought that, they had, moved Mardi Gras, because she was a little girl. And then I told a story about how she went into that classroom, and she sat in that classroom by herself for one whole year. And I told a story about how, in that story, about how she was so depressed. They don't think we feel, but she was so depressed that she would not eat her lunch because she had to eat her lunch by herself. So she began to stuff her lunches into a file cabinet in back of the classroom. And they didn't realize it until one day they were clean, because they saw roaches and stuff, and they found out that little girl had been putting her sandwiches in that cabinet. You cannot be human and not react to something like that. And so I think that there are enough of those stories that we can tell people. I don't have to argue with you. I am not getting ready to argue with you. I know the God that I serve. I know that God is a God of love. I don't understand a lot of things that God does, but I know that if it had not been for God, none of us would be here. So I'm not finna argue with you. I'm not going to do it, but I am going to tell you the stories, and I am going to tell you how we got over And I think that if this book inspires people to want to know more of the history and tell some of the stories, then I'll think that my work would have been done, at least part one.
Yes. Well, I'm looking forward to part two. But I am grateful for the emphasis on storytelling because it sheds light on everyone's experience and it gives life into the humanization of all people so that we can recognize what we've experienced and create space to tell and speak our truths, and for that continue to be deconstructed and reconstructed in useful ways. So I am grateful for you and all that you have shared in our time frame together. It looks like we are coming to a close, but we are grateful for everyone who is tuning in and who is watching, whether you're watching in this moment or whether you'll watch after this recording has completed. If you have not purchased this book yet, With Liberty and Justice for Some, the Bible, the Constitution, and Racism in America, it is available on judsonpress.com. Please take a look, read, and converse with those in your community so that we can continue to do this work together. Dr. Smith, I am grateful for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your words in this time.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will, if anyone reads it and they want to have like a book talk like this, I'm willing to do it because there is really so much for us all to learn and to talk about. So I'm open to that. Just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.